Welcome back. I am thrilled to be reading Willa of the Wood with you as your 4-H book buddy. My name is Mary Beth Martin, and I am diving back in at chapter 40. In my copy, it starts on page 195, so I picked up my copy. Hope you have too and are ready to go. The next morning when she woke, the dog was sitting at the base of the tree, his ears perked and his eyes looking up into the branches. Had the dog somehow detected her, or had the nest of squirrels caught his attention? He wasn't barking or growling, and he didn't seem anxious to attack, but he looked keenly interested, like he was certain there was something up in the tree, maybe the two-legged forest creature he'd seen the day before. "Come on, Scout," the man called as he walked out of the house, down the steps, and towards the barn. But upon noticing the dog's position by the tree, he stopped. The man turned. "Scout?" But the dog didn't move. His nose pointed straight up into the tree. This was a truly bad place to spend the night, Willa decided. Now I've been treed by the pesky dog. As the man walked towards the base of the tree, Willa's heart thumped. Goosebumps rose on her arms. The man stood below her and peered up into the limbs of the tree. His eyes moved from one spot to the next, looking for her, but her legs and arms had taken on the appearance of the branches, and her face was nothing but leaves. "What do you see, boy?" he asked as he crouched down beside his dog. "Is she up there?" She'd shown herself to him 2 days before, but she wouldn't allow him to see her now, not like this, trapped up in a tree, peering down at him like a possum. Then the man and his dog finally gave up and left the area of the tree. Willa climbed down. She watched the man go about his daily work. When he walked through his orchard, he became as dark and crooked as an apple tree's trunk. When he tended to his vegetable garden, she became as green and yellow as stalks of corn. And at the end of the day, when the dog napped in the shade and the man went down to the river to wash his hands and face, she crouched on a rock nearby, as blue as water and gray as stone. The man finished washing up, then climbed back up onto the bank and headed towards the path. Willa jumped from the rock she'd been perched on and followed him into the forest. It was there on the path that led to the house that she chose to reveal herself once more. She pulled on a long, uncertain breath, relaxed the blend of her skin, and stepped onto the path in front of him. She appeared before him in her natural green colors, her face spotted and streaked, her arms marked with marbled patterns, her dark hair falling around her shoulders, and her eyes emerald green. When she looked up and saw her there, he stopped, surprised, his eyes wide for a moment, but he stood very still. "I was hoping you'd come around again," he said. Suddenly, Willa became aware of her own breathing, the position of her feet, and the perspiration on her neck. She studied the man, looking for any signs of threat or attack, taking in all the details. His watching eyes, the light brown whiskers on his face, and his hands freshly cleaned but scratched and worn from his work. His wrinkled tan trousers wet to the knees from standing in the river. All so different from any sort of living thing she'd ever talked to before. "I'm sorry about what happened," he said. "It was so dark and you were moving so fast I couldn't see anything. I shouldn't have pulled that trigger." He paused, waiting for her to reply. She wanted to speak to him. She wanted to take a few steps closer to him, but she didn't know what to say to him or what to do. On the outside, she imagined she appeared to be standing very still, but on the inside, she felt like a trembling fawn, ready to dash away at any moment. "But you don't seem to be too badly hurt anymore," he said to himself, as if he was mystified that her wounds had healed so quickly. "Listen," he added gently, "I know you, and I didn't get off to the right start. But I want you to know that I will not harm you, and you are welcome here." She had never heard the Farron of Dead Hollow use the English words welcome, but she had always loved the word ilun, which she remembered her mother and father saying to her many years before. "Espir dan ilun una," and they had told her the trees will always welcome you. And it was one of the few memories she had of her parents. And then the man said something else that surprised her. My name is Nathaniel. Her ears took the unusual sound into her mind, but still she did not reply. Do you understand the words I'm speaking? He asked her softly. Willa looked at him and took in a long, slow breath. I do, she said. They were the first words she had spoken to him. As soon as the man Nathaniel heard her voice, his face lit up with a sudden and genuine smile. She hadn't seen a smile in so long that it brought an unexpected wash of happiness through her, and she couldn't help but smile in return. I'm glad, he said. I was beginning to wonder if you were some kind of spirit or something, or maybe my wits were finally leaving me for good. I'm as real as the trees around you, she said. I'm just not used to talking to... She let her words dwindle and didn't finish her sentence. I understand, he said. Sometimes no words are just the right amount. She wasn't sure exactly what he meant, but she liked the kindness in his voice when he said it. Are you hungry? He said as he began to walk towards the house and gestured for her to follow him. Let's get something to eat. But the instant he moved, she startled, and she was gone. She had reacted quickly and disappeared, a reflex more than a decision. But once she had a moment to think about it, she realized the man hadn't been trying to hurt her. He had just started to walk up towards the house. But after it happened, she felt too uncertain to rejoin him, and she withdrew back into the forest on her own. The next morning, when the man Nathaniel and the dog Scout came out of the house, the man walked over to the base of the tree in which she was sleeping and set something on the ground. In case you change your mind, he said, and continued into the forest. When the dog lingered behind to sniff at the plate, the man said, No, you've already had your breakfast. Now, come on. Carrying his killing stick in his right hand, the man followed the path that ran along the bank of the river, his dog trotting behind him, and soon they were gone. As Willa climbed down the trunk of the tree and smelled the plate of food, she realized how hungry she truly was. It seemed like she was always hungry. Did the man know this about her? Was that why he had asked her this odd question about whether she was hungry? The Farron of the Dead Hollow lair would never ask her this question. They did not care. As she crouched on the ground and ate the food, she wondered where the man had gone with his dog and his killing stick. He had seemed very determined to find whatever he was looking for, but that evening he returned, exhausted and empty-handed, the dog walking along dejectedly just behind him. As they came towards the house, she decided to stand in the open where they could see her, but she stayed near the edge of the trees just in case. Her temples immediately started pounding, and she had to work hard to keep her breathing strong and steady. But despite the anxiousness welling up inside her chest, she kept her feet firmly planted in the grass. The moment the dog saw her, he jolted to attention. Scout, stay, the man said, stopping the dog in its tracks. Down. The dog went down on his haunches immediately, his whole body shaking with excitement. The dog obviously wanted to run at her, bite her, shake her, tear her to pieces, but the human's commands held him in place. She's a friend, Scout, the man said firmly. You're going to let her be. You got it? Let her be. She's a friend. You just stay. The dog's eyes blazed with intense curiosity as he watched her, but he seemed to understand the man's instructions. When she felt at least somewhat certain the dog wasn't going to attack her, Willa moved her eyes to the man, Nathaniel. He was already looking at her, and he did not look displeased to see her. How was your breakfast this morning? He asked. Thank you, she said, because she thought that was what the day folks said to one another. Yesterday I introduced myself. My name is Nathaniel, and this here is Scout, but we did not get your name. When she thought about telling him her name, her mind flooded with questions. What did a fair name mean to him? What did it sound like? In what way could he use it? Could he harm her with it? There were many thoughts going through her mind all at once, and many of them frightened her. But unlike the day before, when her reflexes had acted before she could even think, now her thoughts came more slowly, more in her control. "What do you wish me to call you?" he asked her. "My name is Willa," she said finally. Nathaniel nodded. "That's a fine and lovely name," he said. "It's good to meet you, Willa. Did your mother give you that name?" "I do not know." "Is your mother nearby?" the man asked, looking out into the forest. "Or your father?" "My mother and father are dead." "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, his voice filled with something that she had never heard outside her own den, a tone, an emotion. She didn't have a word for it. "When did your parents pass away?" he asked. 6 years ago, she said. "Then who takes care of you out here?" he asked. "Out where?" "In the forest." "The forest?" "I don't understand. Who feeds you and gives you shelter? Where do you live?" "The forest," she said again. "There must be someone." "I left my clan." "Your clan?" The man looked around at the forest as if arrows were going to come flying out at him. "But you're not Cherokee, are you?" "No," she said, "I'm not Cherokee." "And you live around here in the forest? That's where you come from?" Not sure she understood his question, she slowly pointed towards the top of the great mountain, which was visible from the open area in front of his house. "You come from Clingman's Dome?" he asked in surprise, but it was clear that he didn't think he was understanding her. "Don't you live in a town, maybe down in the valley, in Cade's Cove, or maybe a new homestead I don't know about?" "No, I live up there," she said again, but then she realized that wasn't actually true anymore. She didn't live in Dead Hollow any longer. She lived in the forest. "I live here," she said, knowing that she was probably confusing him as much as he was confusing her. "But who were your parents? What is your last name?" She didn't understand. She had already told him her name. She thought she knew the English words of the day folk, but she realized now that she must not. "Well, in any case," he turned very slowly this time and carefully gestured for her to follow him, "come on into the house and get something to eat." It had startled her before, but this time she held back her reflex to blend. When he walked, she walked with him, not quite at his side, but a few feet away from him. And the dog crept along with them, eyeing her with quick tilts of his head, but not biting her or even growling. He seemed to understand that the man Nathaniel did not want him to attack her. As they went up the steps and through the front door, he paused, remembering the night she'd come here, the blasting noise of the killing stick, the chomping teeth of the dog, the pain and blood of her wounds, her desperate escape out to the barn. It all started coming back to her. "That's all right," he said. "You and I have made our peace and buried the hatchet." "The hatchet?" she said, pretty sure that was some kind of small sapling killing axe of the hand. "It's just an old expression," he said. "Come on inside." Willa stepped into the house and gazed around at the eating room and the main room beyond. Everything seemed so different from when she had been crawling on the floor through the darkness. "What do you have a hankering for?" he asked. Willa knew immediately what she wanted, even before she could recall its name. She tried to remember what the Cherokee prisoner boy had called them. The word felt wrong on her lips, garbled, like it couldn't actually be a real word, but it made her mouth water just to think about it. "Cook," she said. "Cookies? I have a—" She tried to remember the words he had used. "I have a hankering for cookies." "Ah," he said, "I thought maybe somebody besides me and Scout had been into that jar." The man Nathaniel started to smile. He was trying to be kind to her, welcoming, as he called it. But as soon as he said these words, he seemed to be suddenly overcome. His expressions contorted, and he turned away from her, rubbing his forehead with his hand. I'm afraid my supply of cookies has run dry, he said soberly, with his voice shaking with emotion. After a few moments, he regained his composure and turned back around. But I've got some good fresh cornbread from the latest batch from the mill, and I can cook up some venison if you want a proper meal. What is venison? She asked. He looked at her in surprise. You know, meat? When he saw the confusion on her face, he said, Deer meat. I sleep with deer. I don't eat them, she said. Ah, he said hesitantly. All right. No venison, then. What do you eat? Shoots, berries, nuts, tripe, lichen? He tilted his head as if he wasn't sure if she was being serious with him. I've tried that sort of thing, he said, but never been too partial to it. I'm afraid sticks taste like sticks, if you know what I mean, and I eat acorns in particular. My papa used to tell me you can't eat 'em, but I think you'd have to be full-on starving to do it. Well, listen, let's try some of this cornbread over here and see how you like it. What animal did you kill to make the cornbread? She said, narrowing her eyes at him. It's made from corn flour from the mill, he said. The wheel and the water? That's right. So it's called a mill. Yes, that's right. People bring me their corn and their wheat, and I grind it. I take 1 sack out of every 8 in the way of payment. I figure why plant and harvest crops, digging in the dirt for somebody else all day when I can sit and watch a wheel go around on my own sweet time. You weren't watching the wheel go around on the day I first saw you, she said, trying to say the word round like he did. No, that's true. Somebody did me a bad turn, shoved a hammer in my machinery, knocked everything all catawampus, trying to break the teeth off my main gear. Looking to put me out of business, no doubt, but I stopped it in time and got the gears lined up proper again. Willa listened as carefully as she could, trying to understand all the confusing words he used, but she couldn't understand how the mill could have teeth. I'm competing with half a dozen other mills down in Cade's Cove, he continued on, so I need to keep working. Is that who damaged the mill? No, those are good day folk down there, he said. We're competitors, sure, but they never do anything underhanded like that. He looked out the window towards the forest. I know exactly who did it, he said bitterly, and those are the ones you gotta be careful of. This man, Nathaniel, talked in a peculiar fashion, and he talked a lot. It was as if for years he had been used to talking all day, but lately he had been alone, and all the words pent up inside him came pouring out, like splashing water down through the buckets of his wheel. As he continued, he didn't speak as much as he did, but watched him and listened to him. He fascinated her. He wasn't anything like the Patteran had told her of the day folk. He wasn't violent or hateful. He didn't attack her or beat her or try to capture her or kill her. She'd seen other homesteaders only from a distance, small families building their log cabins, tending to their little farms, traveling in their carriages. But this man who called himself Nathaniel seemed so different from the Patteran, the Jaders, and the other Farron of the clan. Were all the day folk as evil as the Patteran described, other than this one man? Why do you cut trees? She blurted out suddenly, looking for his evilness. Ah! He hesitated, unable to find the words to explain his actions. Why do you kill them? She pressed him. I cut trees to make my house, to warm my home, to make tools. There are many uses for wood. I could not live here without it. Why are you asking this question? Are the trees friends of yours? She knew he had meant this as a joke, but she answered him with the truth. Yes, they are, she said, and when you cut them, they die. He studied her for several long seconds, not saying a word. Yes, he admitted finally, quite softly, the trees die. But I can only cut what I need. We all have to survive. Do you all need that wall? she asked, pointing towards the wooden wall. Do you need the wooden wheel that turns in the water more than those trees need their lives? Do you need the meat of the deer more than the deer need her life? More than the fawn needs her mother? I never looked at it that way, he admitted, and then he repeated, I just take what I need. Like the wolf, she said. I don't know about that, he said, bristling. He didn't like to be compared to a wolf. She could see he had no love for wolves. He was a kind man, but a fool, too. She watched as he pulled out a sharpened blade of steel with an antler grip, cut a slice of cornbread, and handed it to her. Have some of this and see how you like that meal, he said, smiling a little. You want butter on that? No, she said. She didn't know what butter was or what he killed to make it. As soon as she put the bread between her lips, it began to melt in her mouth. It was unlike anything she had ever tasted before. You like that? He said, nodding and smiling. You like it a lot? You see, I'm not all bad. The first day, when she was watching him from the forest, he had seemed so sad, and then his melancholy shifted like the wind into a deep anger. And when he returned from his journey down the river earlier that afternoon, he had seemed so exhausted, not just in body but in spirit. But now he seemed to have forgotten a little of what had stormed through him a short time before. And she could see the same thing happening to her. Their words and their smiles were affecting her, changing her in little ways, like the river shaping the stone. We have come to the end of chapter 41, so we will pick up next time, continuing in the adventure of Willa of the Wood.